Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I'll tell you what, we've taken a little time away from talking to this guy, and he's always one of my favorite segments, and with Oriole Magic around the corner, and Masson showing some games and not showing other games, and the Washington National Football League team, and all sorts of dispute in a hard way. It is always good to welcome the wisdom of Marty Conway back on. He is the good professor at Georgetown University. You can follow his journey out on LinkedIn as well as Twitter and all sorts of places where smart people opine about things. Marty, I saw a great video on Neil Peart a couple weeks ago about 10 life lessons, and it said that he said at one point, he said, I make conversation for curious, intelligent people, and I like to think that our conversations are about that sort of at a different level, but then we get into the muck of how things are really run and how, the way the world works. And the Washington football team certainly set you ablaze last week, being a longtime executive in sports. And quite frankly, I know you have a daughter that's very, very involved in sports. Came really, really close to getting a Super Bowl ring a couple years ago. I'm not going to bring that up with the Atlanta Falcons. But this really hits close to home when the Daniel Snyder shenanigans of the Washington football team, I sensed your real paternal anger coming out last week on Twitter.
Well, look, I think this about sports in general. First of all, for all of pro sports, when they're not playing, things tend to go wrong. I don't care whether you're talking about back in the day of the Ray Rice scenarios or the Washington Redskins, whatever. It seems that when they're not in season, when they're not playing, the risk of exposure issues, whatever, goes higher. And specifically about the Redskins football team last week, the point is this: operating a pro sports franchise above a certain level, there are some that are a real struggle, but at the most part, it's not real difficult. In particular, for our friends at the NFL, because the guaranteed money is so strong, 250, 260, probably soon to be $300+ million a year in national television revenues. That covering, not only does it cover your salary cap, but it covers a significant part of your other expenses as well. And so I've always found it really difficult to understand when a leader can't run a sports organization effectively because, through the franchise, through the monopoly of the league, they've eliminated all your competition. And most businesses, don't survive when they have strong competition. So that's why I find it so difficult for an organization like the Redskins to not operate in a humane way, because you're not worried about going out of business. The inside of the franchise shouldn't be that difficult on a day-to-day basis. But for whatever reason, a lot of the owners struggle with that capability. I don't know if it's their age or their gender or whatever it is, but in the absence of establishing a real culture, and I do think Steve Bisciotti does set a real culture for the Ravens, for example, in the absence of setting a real culture, individuals will take their own values and apply those. And we saw that with the Redskins. Look, the other part of that is having been at Georgetown for more than 10 years now, having taught a lot of students, having had a lot of students go and intern at the Redskins, and lastly, have had many female students work there. I know firsthand these are things that were not really talked about in public at all, but this has been going on for as long as the Redskins have been owned by Dan Snyder. And unfortunately, it took a Washington Post expose followed by the New York Times expose 2 years ago when they had the cheerleading scandal, that this was just the culture of a organization that is almost a $4 billion company generating hundreds of millions of dollars a year in income, and oh, by the way, supported and playing in government-funded stadiums. So that's why I find it really hard to sit back and not be responsive about issues that occur like that in an organization like that has all the public money as well as all the natural money that comes from the NFL and the owners. So I don't know why he still owns the team. I don't know why he's allowed to own the team. But that's the current situation where we are.
Well, and there's also minority investors that want to get out, and John Moog's name came up last week. Marty Conway is our guest. He's down at Georgetown, and just sort of in between classes and bringing people. I mean, I could sit here for hours and probably go through this, but with baseball beginning this week, and this is just a fascinating conversation that I had, and this spans the generations, okay? I mean, you're sort of a newish friend. I did not know you in 1983. I did not know you in 1992. I did not know you when I met George Bush in Arlington, when you were there with the All-Star Game in 1995 and were a Baltimore voice. But in the modern era of getting to know you, there are people I've known all these years. So last week I caught up with Rick Vaughn, a name that I know you know well. I caught up with Kevin Byrne last week, leaving the Ravens organization. And we talked this week. I caught up with Greg Bedard last week in Boston. I'm going to catch up with Dan Shaughnessy and Bob Ryan this week because the Orioles are playing in Boston to start this week. Man, it's really an amazing thing over my career. 29 years I've been doing this. We've had NST about 21, 22 years now, 22 summers. And where the Orioles were and the Ravens were a generation ago, where the Redskins and the Capitals and the Bullets and the Nationals not existing, where Boston sports was before the Red Sox won, where Greg Bedard said to me, the Patriots own Boston, then there's the Celtics, and then the Red Sox. How did the Red Sox become number 3 in Boston? How did the Redskins become number 3 in Washington? How did the Orioles become number well, we only have 2 teams. Number 2 in Baltimore, Marty. It really is incredible what arrogance. Because when I think of the Orioles, I think of the Red Sox, I think of the Redskins, and I think of my career as a journalist, knocking on doors, having friends like mine, like Marvin Lewis, who worked there and worked other places, having friends of mine like Mike Nolan, who had the owner dump ice cream on his desk, destroying his desk overnight because he thought the defense was too vanilla. This is, I mean, literally, right? Like, I've had the Orioles stories, dude, are legendary. You and I have a beer at Amici's and talk about them once a year. We've talked about the things we can legally talk about on the air, not Mike Flanagan's suicide withstanding, all of these things that go on, the Ray Rice things, the Ray Lewis things with the Ravens, just all of these sort of jurisprudence weird things that have happened over a quarter of a century, and how the consumer here feels about the Ravens versus the Orioles versus the NFL team in Washington that we're not even allowed to say their name anymore versus the world champion Nationals who came to Baltimore on Monday night for a baseball game. These franchises, they really do sort of reap what they sow in the grand scheme of things. In the end, when the Cardinals take care of St. Louis takes care of the Cardinals, right? And when you don't, you're just, you're the Tampa Rays, or I don't know what you are, but you're sort of this lost, bewildered, you're the Washington Redskins. I mean, they're a joke on the field, they're a joke off the field, their stadium's a joke, the experience of going there is a joke, the price is a joke, their training camp was a joke, the owner's a joke. I mean, literally, there's nothing left, there's no soul left there. It kind of reminds me of the baseball team here.
Well, yeah, there's a whole list of things that have occurred or not occurred, frankly, since Dan Snyder took control of the team 20 some years ago, and he's evaporated not only a fan base, but he's evaporated a waiting list of 50,000 people and a number of other things. And again, I just reiterate, the NFL model is keeping the Redskins in business. Let's be clear about that, because if they didn't have that model of revenue sharing of $6 to $7 billion annually of national TV contracts, I suspect the team would operate differently, the owner would operate differently, and it would be different. Because
your point is a chimpanzee could roll out of bed owning the Washington National Football League team, and it would be profitable, literally.
Look, the greatest thing that ever happened was Pete Rozelle getting the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961 through Congress that allowed the NFL to legally pool all of their TV rights and sell them collectively. Up to that point, that was a violation of the antitrust laws. And so, the NFL, frankly, has been built on a number of issues like that, where they have secured their future based on political and legislative opportunities, and now they're into the media and sponsorship wing of that. And so owners and operators have reaped the benefits of that for decades and decades and decades. And so that's why this is sort of where we are. Look, there are franchises. It all comes down to ownership and leadership, and there are franchises owned by individuals and families that have been able to sustain or even grow the organization. But unfortunately, you have Donald Sterling's and Dan Snyder's mixing in with the Steve Bisciottis and the DeWitts and the other esteemed families around the NFL. Now, I question here that is that for a franchise like Dan Snyder in the NFL, the only way he's going to lose that franchise is the same way that Don Sterling lost it, and that is the other owners are going to finally decide, you know what, the ownership in Washington, D.C., which is such an important city for the NFL, to actually have owners and a team that is respected and has the support of both political parties and the sort of political class of Washington, that they make a decision that it's no longer tenable to have him hold the hands and the reins of the franchise. Right now, I think they're close. I think literally, this is for another time, but I do think the name change scenario was a contrived reaction to a lot of the things that were going on in here. I don't think the NFL's reaction or inaction to the sex harassment scandal would have been the same had he not propped up the name change 2 or 3 weeks earlier. And so there's a lot of questions, and I think when the investigations look into this, I think journalists are looking into this now, trying to figure out, let's put these pieces together. When actually did he make the decision on the name change? When did the minority owners actually want to sell? How far back does this go? What's that chronology look like? This is not happenstance. These are not just incidents that occur independent of one another, and I think that's what you're going to find is that he knew what was coming down the pike, and as a way to change the narrative, he pushed the name change to the front and is trying to counter the narrative in a lot of ways and hope that he can get through this season at least and then turn the page. And I'm not sure what the future looks like for the franchise.
Well, everybody wants the fresh start the day after they get caught effing up, right? Like, everybody says the next day that there'll be a new me tomorrow based on literally nothing in the case of Dan Snyder, who, even the name change has been ridiculously sloppy. I mean, I literally talked to a longtime executive last week who just said, why don't you just let the fans name the team? This isn't hard. You know what I mean? This is pretty easy stuff, right?
Yeah, let's be clear. This is not a normal process at all, which is why the abnormality of it sticks out, because you literally have probably dozens of people involved typically. I've gone through 2 rebranding exercises in sports. The number of people that you have involved both locally and at the respective NFL or MLB offices is considerable, which is why it takes a year to 2 years to make the change, because you have internal issues, trademark, all that sort of stuff. And then you have external issues. You literally have people driving around with HVAC rigs and soda rig, soft drink rigs, saying such and such HVAC or Pepsi, the official soft drink of the Washington Redskins. Now, you tell me if you think they're going to change that within 2 to 4 weeks. The answer is no. It's going to take them probably 6 months or longer to make those kind of changes.
Well, Nike made the change for him, right? And Dick's and all the others said, "Man, we're just not going to sell your stuff anymore. We're not selling."
Right. So having said that, that's why I think a lot of this was reactionary to what he knew was going on. Look, when the Washington Post does a story like that, they don't call you 3 days before and tell you they're working on the story. They know, people in the organization know that people have been contacted about their NDAs. They know something is going on. And then the Post contacts you and says, here's our story. They lay it out for them, and they say, we'll give you 48 hours to respond.
Well, the NDA itself speaks for itself, right? If Dan Snyder wants to change his ways, he won't be muzzling the women like your daughter who've worked for him, right? Literally, that's at the core of this issue is, I know I didn't do anything awful to you, but keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, just as whatever may or may not have happened to people who sign NDAs on the way out, what they're agreeing to is to, in return for some sort of modest severance, is never speaking disparagingly about the team again, whether it's about sex harassment or other types of things that occur. Now, also keep in mind, the people that were identified and left this organization, fired or resigned, think about the jobs that they had. One of them was the director of pro personnel. So you're telling me that the director of pro personnel couldn't keep his mind straight day after day, focused on trades, evaluating players, free agency, all those types of things. If you wonder why the franchise was in trouble the way it was, look at the people that were making personnel decisions, and they were not focused on this 24/7, 365. That's why the franchise was struggling, was the quality of the people that they hired and held on to throughout all these years.
Marty Conway is here. He is a longtime insider in the sports business world. He's down at Georgetown doing the teaching thing via Zoom. And the Orioles in Major League Baseball get back on the field, Marty. I've been talking all week about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea from a player safety. Look, if this was about player safety, they wouldn't be playing. I've said, where else are we going to sanction 22 grown men without masks rolling around in the mud fighting over a piece of leather for our entertainment and for us to wager on it on weekends? So all that being said, the football thing and the safety aside, baseball's giving this the real try, and I'm watching it, and just from a consumer standpoint, and I know you were always concerned about this with a brand level with the sport of baseball, which you loved, I loved. I mean, whether we still love it or how much we love the shift or the rules or how the game's played. But watching this over the weekend and realizing that when opening day comes, it's going to sound the same, it's going to look the same. I saw these empty seats behind Citi Field, and I quipped that maybe somebody was stuck on the 7 train. You can joke about it all you want, but then there's the point where it's you and Scott Garceau and Mike Bordick on a lonely Monday night, and no sounds, no nothing, no chance of winning, no players you care about, and whether you're really going to sit there for 3 hours on a Monday night, a Tuesday night, a Wednesday night, a Thursday night, this month, next month, and watch it. And I just think as a television product, and we talk so much about the NFL being such a great TV product that it keeps people from going, not to mention the price and everything else that goes into it, but from the baseball perspective, when they say you can't come, stay home, as the Orioles did 5 years ago in that game, and you watch it and there's no one there, it's really not a very good, compelling product. And it doesn't have bells and whistles and horns and hot dog races and crab races and all of that stuff that they put at you at the ballpark. At home, it's a very, very flat version of a sporting event on television.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely an inferior product, and what we're going to find, we've already found, is that both viewership, there might be a spike at one point when it first comes back, and sponsorship are both going to likely be down. Now, the viewership numbers may increase because of sports gambling and betting on football and some other things like that, but let's be clear, it's an inferior product because for decades they've been trying to figure out from a TV perspective, how do we show fan engagement? How do we show excitement? How do we bring that drama, to the telecast? And as you've seen early on here with the first few baseball telecasts, it's worse than spring training. Like it just looks like an inter squad game from the first 3 days of spring training, and no amount of a piped in fan response and other things like that is going to change that. And again, I think this is going to be the type of inferior experience. Now, look, I think the NFL is a completely different class. I think the networks are so invested in it that they will do some additional things. But now we really see the value of what fans mean to a franchise. And we've talked for decades now about people having fan engagement principles, fan engagement this, fan engagement that. Now we see that there is no separating it. Look, the bottom line is this. From a business standpoint, all they're really trying to secure by doing these return to play, no fan experiences, et cetera, are securing two things. They're trying to secure viewership through their national TV contracts, and they're trying to secure sponsorship through their national sponsors, a Geico, Coca-Cola, Xfinity, somebody who's in the market all the time and just needs to see their impressions continue. So that's really the purpose of coming back. What they've done is they've said, we're sort of take this ticket revenue and throw it off the boat because we really don't need it right now. What we really need is to secure our viewership TV dollars and our national sponsorship dollars, and we'll just try to get to the next season without any ticket revenue or very, very low amounts of ticket revenue. That's essentially what the decisions that have been made.
Well, Marty, we're talking about the money part of it. We all smell the money, right? We all get that it's better for them to play than not play, no matter who wins, no matter who loses, no matter who cheats in Houston, no matter who gets sick, quite frankly. But here we go now where the NFL is going to put these guys in rooms. None of it makes any sense. They're all going to break the rules, right? Because the rules are impossible to not break if you are going to play football. Baseball, I've seen guys circle second base. I saw Hanser Alberto the other night with a mask on. I'm watching players play with baseball. They feels like they're far away. I even heard Alex Cobb, don't ask me why I'm watching this, but on Monday night, he even said, I haven't really seen any of the position players because the pitchers are sequestered. We're trying not to be around them. I'm trying not to be around my teammates. Literally, he said that out loud. And I thought, well, it's baseball. You can pull that. You can't pull that when you're the left guard in football. You can't pull that when you're the wide receiver and the quarterback. And I pray for all of them. I mean, honestly, dude, I'm in the sports business, right? I mean, I'm not the guy thinking they shouldn't play, but I'm also not the a-hole that thinks, let's subject Lamar Jackson's mother to this. You know what I mean? These guys live with wives, they live with kids. You teach their kids. I don't think kids should be going to school. I don't think any of this is safe. I think Donald Trump is a buffoon who's been lying to us from the beginning, and I think we are not safe. And I've been to North Carolina and been where people didn't have masks on. I've seen the line around the convention center last week, realizing a couple days later there was going to be bad news here, right? So you sort of see and feel all of this. I look at this baseball situation and say maybe they can get away with it. They do DLs. They're not really on top of each other. So if one guy pops or two guys pop, they just bring up some pitchers and they play ball and they'll get through it and they'll get their 8 weeks in and the Orioles will stink and most of the teams will stink and most of them won't care and some of them will quit before they... I mean, all of that's going to go on. It's going to be a disgrace from an integrity standpoint, but I do think maybe they'll pull it off. Football, I don't see it, Marty. I don't see it. I don't see it. I don't understand why they're starting because I don't think they can finish. And that's a Tony Robbins know your outcome thing for me to say, do you really think you're going to get any semblance of 27 or 28 out of these 32 teams through the season without canceling games, canceling flights, shutting down organizations, shutting down buildings, shutting down the defensive line room of the Green Bay Packers? Do you really think you're going to do this with any integrity? And I think where they are now, they've gone with the Astros theory, right? The integrity doesn't matter, Marty, as long as we get the games in. That's... I think they realize they're going to be carcasses along the highway, but that's just the NFL. We're just going to play on. We get hurt guys here every week. We had broken necks here. We play through it, and I don't like the way this is going. I just don't think this. I just don't think this is going to have a good ending for them, for the NFL.
Look, there's not much there that I would disagree with. What I would clarify is I think there's really one reason why any football will be played in the fall, and that is football plus television, because you're going to see the NFL play because of television, and you'll see the SEC play and the ACC and the Big Ten and all that. What you've already seen is football without television, lower level Division I conferences, all of Division II, all of Division III, all of junior college say there will be no football, there will be no sports in the fall. So the connection to television.
And why? Because it's not safe, right? Literally, the why is it is not safe to do it, period.
And they just don't need to do it. If there's another time it can be played, winter, late winter, spring, whatever it is, then that's what they're pushing it off until. So there's really two things here that go into it. Number one, it's the connection to television and the overriding amount of dollars that are coming in from that. And number two, the ability to test and create that environment. If you look at what the NBA has done, obviously they have a different experience now, but they've put their bubble full in place. They've had no positive tests. They're spending somewhere between $150 and $200 million to put that whole thing on. And that is so that in return, they can get about $1 billion from their national TV providers to finish the season and to play the playoffs. And that's what you're seeing is the big differential between where are we playing sports and football in particular and where aren't we is two things. It's television revenues and dollars spent on testing protocols. Now, again, NFL is completely different. Those guys go home, they come back. There's not going to be a bubble. I do think there's a higher risk of having games on particular weeks not be played because of outbreaks or things that occur. But I think they are determined to try to play into the season and have testing as well as therapeutics and other things and hope that those kind of things come online. But again, this is all driven by football is being played where there is a television connection, and where there's not a television connection, it's not being played because of the expense and the safety issues of putting it on. And I think that's pretty clear.
Marty Conway is our guest. You can follow him out on Twitter as well as at LinkedIn. All right, last thing, Marty, for you. You've watched all of this sort of unfold, and you've been in these sort of crisis management labs, and now watching this as as an elder in all of this. If they bring you in to consult, or if you're in any of these organizations and had any influence or power in any of the four major sports, the one thing that's very, very obvious here, and this speaks to you being a guy with a passport, me being a guy with a passport, is in other places, societally, they've done this differently. In South Korea, the way they think about things, the way they pull together, the way they think about true nationalism, not racism, what patriotism means, what safety means, what my wife's German sponsor who saved her life, what's going on in their country. And we've watched them kick the soccer ball around. We're watching them play baseball. Adam Jones is hitting home runs in the middle of the night. I see he and Audie sharing stuff out on Facebook. We're a different bird here, and you know that, I know that. Most smart people who have passports and have spent time here sort of know that, when the guys with the beards and the machine gun showed up at the governor's mansion in Michigan, that's just not happening in Seoul. That's just not the way they roll there. So for me, with our country in the next 3, 4, 5 months, and where sports is and how important sports is perceived to be here, that if we're playing games on weekends, things are fine here, right? For all of the leadership in these sports, where do you give them grades on putting this thing together? Because they clearly thought and prayed and got together and counted their money and got their lawyers. I mean, this was a crisis management of the highest order for everyone in the universe, literally, everybody on the planet. But for the four leagues, the way they're trying to come out of this right now and sort of shake it all off, where do you grade the four of them? And I know none of them have closed up shop, but on the Rudy Gobert day, they all decided that it was a great idea that day, right? Yeah. And the virus wasn't even nobody was dying yet. Now we got people dying everywhere. We got 49 hospitals in Florida with no ICU beds, ventilated. All of that nightmare that we saw in April is real now, and they're all trying to open their doors. I really, really, I worry for them because this is just not smart for them. And people are going to die for real. And it's just going to be collateral damage the same way it is in the mind of the guy running the country at this point. If one of these guys' mothers in the NFL gets it, or wives, and I don't know what's going to shut it down. That's the hard part. That's where I'm really giving them a bad grade, because they're starting it up when they know they shouldn't, and I don't know what's going to shut it down.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think that look, the NFL at this point, I would have to give them just an incomplete because they're going in. But for all of them, these return to play guidelines, 100 pages, 200 pages, 400 pages. I mean, there's incredible return to play guidelines they've issued. That's all these are. They are really just guidelines. The fact of the matter is, I think they're seeing once the rubber hits the road on these type of return to play issues, there are many things that they've haven't contemplated that are sort of unintended consequences. I've talked to people involved in the sport organizations who've looked at these and said, these return to play guidelines are impossible to actually adhere to, even in the bubble in NBA, the people that I've talked to there.
Marty,
said,
I've called it safe sex, right? I've said it is literally an honor system. It is nothing more, nothing less than an honor system. I mean, the NBA passed it for one day earlier in the week, and everybody's singing high hosannas. And I'm like, the sun's going to come up again tomorrow. You realize that, right?
Yeah. And so, again, look, I'm torn a little bit here because, as you know, the people that I talk to and the people that I'm concerned about have pledged their careers to a sports organization and to a sports industry. And to some extent, some of having to play is to salvage what you can, because the owners cannot pay everybody for a year and a half. Even the government can't chip in and pay for everybody for a year and a half not to work. So to some extent, I know what they're trying to do, which is to try to return to play, to save as many jobs, to save as many dollars. Look, I'm all for about saving the dollars, but let's keep in mind every dollar that they bring in some way, shape, or form is going to employ a person and a family for an entire year. So that needs to happen. We don't need to shut down the movie industry and the finance industry and all that. The sports industry can figure out a way to operate. Having said that, I do think they put a great strain on the rest of the community in terms of testing protocols. Just look at it now. If you go to a CVS today and want to get a virus test, it's going to take you probably between 6 and 10 days to get your results back. Why? Part of that contributing factor is organizations like the NFL, Major League Baseball, and the NBA, who are putting such a load on these organizations that are doing the actual testing results. It's now impossible to actually get your test result in the time frame that you might be contagious. And so,
well, we're going to lose baseball games in the first 10 days. That's just going to happen. They're going to be double headers because Johnny's tested and come back, right?
Yeah, well, there's going to be some inconclusive results, just like the Nats had a couple about a week ago where they didn't get the results back, so they really didn't know and they didn't want to take the chance. I think there's going to be those sporadically along the way, and Major League Baseball literally is trying to figure out a way. Now, at some point, if your testing rates are really low, 1%, 2%, whatever that number is, I don't think they're going to keep the protocols in place to test every day or maybe even every other day, because they're going to see that, what they figured out here is people are actually working within the protocols. So what I say is those 300-page return-to-play guidelines, they basically mean nothing when people come back and try to play these games. And I think they're just going to be, frankly, in a day-for-day mode, hoping they get to the next week in the NFL, hoping they get to October for Major League Baseball. Basketball, I think, is going to be fine. And hockey, we're not even talking about it because it's going to be in Canada, and I just don't know how much interest there will be because they haven't even really been talking about their bubbles here in the United States. So, like I said, they're just hoping to get the ship from one side of the river to the other by next year and hope that there's as limited damage as possible so that they can at least pick up from there. That's their only hope, I think, for the major sports. And the guys, the conferences and organizations that don't have the dollars, they've decided we're sitting it out and we'll see you next spring or maybe summer.
Well, I guess we'll have real sports to talk about when we get together again in a couple of weeks here, Marty. But how you holding up? Doing all right? Wash your hands and teaching the children well and do. I mean, no Springsteen, no Pearl Jam, no concerts. No, I don't know. What are you doing? You learning to fish? Have you taken up a new hobby or anything or no?
Continue to read. Listen to every Sirius XM Springsteen concert that there is. Try to watch CNBC. Just try to change some of those habits, but it's going to start to change here. We will start to see some more live sports. I had to exist on like horse racing and international soccer for a month and a half, but that's changing everybody's habits. We'll see what happens when sports does return, whether those fans come back and how they come back, or whether they've moved on to they don't have cable bill anymore or whatever it is. There's going to be a lot of those changes that they're going to have to deal with.
For every Zoom chat there was on NFL Network with Coach Billick and the 2001 Super Bowl champs, there was the errant Game 7 of the 1979 World Series that I've been subjected to here, over the last 6 months. So, yeah, been a little good, a little bad, but it will be nice to get back to something that feels live. But I am very, very skeptical. So I'll remain skeptical until I see a Super Bowl in Tampa in February. How about that?
I agree. I think all these are going to be on a week-to-week, and I wouldn't put any forward bets on too many of these games because they just may not happen or they won't happen at that time.
I like that. The status report says day to day, and what was it? Baseball Manager said we're all day to day, right?
Exactly. At this point, we are.
Marty Conway, you can find him out on LinkedIn. You can find him at Georgetown. You can find him at Twitter at Marty Conway, longtime Baltimore Orioles insider and Texas Rangers, and now teaching the children and the studentry well at Georgetown. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day. We are reformulating, rethinking the Baltimore positive WNST relationship. But for here and for now, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and anywhere social media goes, including our YouTube channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570. We are calm. We are local. Washing our hands, wearing our masks, and staying Baltimore positive.